Palworld was first announced as this super edgy alternative version of Pokemon where the creatures that you collected could be thrown into the coal mines for your own nefarious gains. And what's more is that you could defend yourself with guns. I put this thing on my Steam wishlist and patiently waited for a release date. The initial trailer also hinted at there being some base building and survival crafting type mechanics, which lit up the parts of my brain that has this many hours in these specific games. I was bound and determined to get this game on frame one because I knew it would cater to my specific interests. Early reviews and impressions came in a few days before the title was set to release in early access for the rest of us, but in my interest of wanting to experience as much of the game for myself, I did quite literally zero research on it. In hindsight, that was kind of dumb because now I'm suffering from buyer's regret, even if that's not targeted at the gameplay itself. Palworld shares a lot of mechanics similar to a bunch of different games, ranging from the ability to capture wildlife to help you around with base chores, while the building and survival aspects feel a little bit closer to the Rust gameplay experience. Having to micromanage individual creatures so that their traits are best suited to individual tasks reminds me a lot of Oxygen Not Included. Fast traveling, general adventuring, and cooking are reminiscent of Legend of Zelda. The boss arenas and fights remind me of Genshin Impact. And in order to get some specific resources in this game, you have to hunt down some specific monsters. So you hear that, Nick? It's just like Monster Hunter. And of course, the big elephant in the room, no, not that one, is that this game is a creature collector at its core. No other franchise has popularized that gameplay style as much as Pokemon, and I for one thought it was really cool that all of these games could be combined with a franchise that I have enjoyed for most of my life. It feels like part of a logical step that Legends Arceus could have made, and thanks to the leveling system that's present in Palworld, a lot of the monsters that you engage with are genuinely terrifying to encounter. I'm getting ahead of myself and talking in buzzwords, so let me just dial it all back a bit. When you first load up the game, you're prompted to create a world and are immediately led into the best feature of any RPG adjacent title, the character creation menu. They even have a preset that's just Hatsune Miku. So I guess this game rips off of Vocaloid too. Yo, is that fucking Hatsune Miku?
Sure is. It's Hatsune Miku.
Hey, what up, unnamed Hatsune Miku?
Free thinkers, am I right?
Are we gonna name our colony Vocaloid? Is that the plan? The early parts of the game are defined by the basic mechanics that you would find in any regular survival crafting RPG. You can walk, you can jump, you go talk to the person here who gives you a little bit of resources, you then touch this tower here to activate a fast travel point. Now go punch a tree to build your first few tools. And now I see exactly what people meant when they said that this game was just like Minecraft. There's a list of tasks to be done in the top right corner that will push the player into the rest of the game, with the most important one being to capture your first pal. And how do we do this, you may ask? By pretending to be PETA, of course. Legitimately, the way that the player catches the creatures is by lowering their health using primitive weaponry and then throwing a PAL sphere at them. This PAL is then equipped to your team, and if there are no slots left in your 5-slot team, they are then sent to the PAL box, which is the center of your base. From there, the player can start deploying PALs to start working on tasks around the base to help automate the tasks at a variety of workstations. And every different PAL has a different task that they specialize in. For example, the Lamball PAL can help with crafting materials. The Cativa PAL can help with mining and is one of the earlier units that has this capability. As the player catches more PALs and interacts with the world around them, they gain experience points towards their overall player level. Now, the player level can be elevated through a variety of drip feed means. Crafting items gets you experience points, catching PALs gets you experience points, picking up items littered around the world, defeating boss monsters. Basically, anything that has you progressing the means of production at your home base will increase your player level. Funny enough, this doesn't really seem to include building structures, but given the fact that you can assemble and disassemble anything with a click of a few buttons, that's probably intentional. I went back and double checked this and looked. Build a wooden foundation, got 3 EXP, and I can just Oops. It's kind of a weird way to do it, but like, it's definitely just getting like faster at it. Oh, lost an arrow. But yeah, that is something that I can do to level up, but it doesn't seem incredibly efficient. Like you'd be using your time better on other things around the map. Every time the player levels up, they are given the option to put points into a specific stat to make their character stronger, and then they are awarded a handful of technology points. Tech points are put towards your basic crafting tree, where every player level unlocks a new row, and tech points have to be spent to get progressively stronger items. More importantly, the player's level is directly tied to the level of the pals and the monsters that they can fight and capture, meaning that this is the primary way that one measures their progress. I may not be level 33 yet, but once I get there, you had better believe that I am taking down this giant grassy mammoth with me and all my little fellas. In order to catch more unique pals, the player needs to set out further and further away from the base. This gets one into the rhythm of setting up projects for the pal at the base before taking themselves to the farthest fast travel point and scouring the land from there for creatures yet undiscovered. Occasionally there will be some combat encounters between the player and aggressive pals or members of a syndicate, making the journey from point to point just a little hazardous. Most of the hours that I've rationalized into playing this game have been spent on wanting to make the next improvement. I might have the high quality workbench now, but I also probably want to go out and get a couple of resources so I can make better tools at this new workbench. And, well, you know, from there you get the point. It's an addicting gameplay loop that reminds me of my Stardew Valley days, so we might as well throw that one up on the mess of the graphic that I've made here. As much as I've been riffing on the fact that nobody can talk about this game without making general genre comparisons, the Stardew Valley comparison is one that I'll dive into a little bit more. I found Palworld to be similar to Stardew Valley in its gameplay loop. By selling good crops and growing the farm bit by bit, I could perpetually work towards the next base upgrade, which in turn would allow me to build more tools that help me grow more crops and have more money in the bank. In Palworld, I get to build items so that I can get more powerful pals, to get better items, to explore the world more easily, and then to get even better pals. There are a lot of differences between a top-down 16-bit farming simulator and an Unreal Engine tech demo. The one I'd like to focus on, though, is how Stardew Valley has endgame goals that realistically measure the player's progress on the outskirts of Pelican Town. Marrying an NPC of choice, getting the most expensive item in the shop, completing all of the achievements, getting all of the cooking recipes completed. These are all greater goals beyond just all farm cooler stuff, I guess, that I feel Palworld is severely lacking. Sure, I might be able to work my way up to eventually defeat the giant grassy mammoth, but the system currently in place, I imagine, isn't going to make it feel like I've actually made progress in the game, as much as it'll feel like I'm completing busy work, kind of like another open world RPG game I know. Getting high quality sprinklers in Stardew Valley or completing the greenhouse were things that allowed me to play the game differently as I made those points of progress. Getting an assault rifle to take down bosses later in the game without a clear end goal is going to feel like I am just doing the same thing that I was in the early game, except now I can really just blow away all of those level 3 monsters that I encountered at the beginning, even if they serve no purpose now. The saving grace of all the comparisons is that they really highlight how unique Palworld could be. By amalgamating several other ideas into one cohesive package that has far outshone anything Nintendo and Game Freak has done in the last 15 years, Platinum my beloved, Palworld is its own unique experience, and an addicting one at that. If that all sounds good to you, then who am I to stop you from enjoying your time? Go forth, spend your money, have a blast. Don't mind me saying buyer's regret earlier and ignore the timestamp in the video. Those are merely figments of your imagination. Much like the United States Army and Air Force advertisements that I get regularly, if cruelty and weaponry are their main selling points, it's probably a decent idea to avoid them. As a counterexample, let's examine the trailer for Ultra Kill. Ultra Kill is a game that doesn't shy away from its adherence to violence, as a silly blue robot violently eviscerates the denizens of hell using the power of friendship and this shotgun it found. It also shows off a wealth of movement and healing mechanics that can be mastered in order to navigate navigate the game smoothly. The most important thing is that Ultra Kill knows that it is a bloody and violent game, and it uses its stark appearance to complement that fact. It's Doom Eternal for queers. That's terrible. Palworld, on the other hand, appears to be a very cutesy open world RPG until you realize that the monkey has a gun. In its advertising, Palworld makes the game seem like its main point is using automatic weaponry to wipe out endemic life, which gives off the same energy as edgy Sonic OCs.
Yeah, this is my version of that game, but it comes with a tragic backstory and its eyes can change color depending on its mood.
Pocket Pair's game is a perfectly agreeable survival crafting game that meshes together with the creature collector genre in a way that innately satirizes it. Heck, when I was a kid, my parents had their objections towards Pokemon, not because the creatures were demonic like every other conservative Christian parent believed at the time, but because they didn't like the idea of me engaging in what was basically fantasy dogfighting. Now we have a game that forces you to club baby lambs and teach them the ways of the Industrial Revolution. If Palworld had chosen to gone down the path of highlighting its strengths as a creature collector game and a survival crafting game, with the cruel twist of putting the pals on the assembly line, that would have been fine. Edgy? Sure, but not with like color-changing eyes. A gun is such a stark departure from what the general populace knows about the general experience of the games that are related to this title. When you add in these cutesy mascots and bind it to the creature collector genre, it's no wonder that people immediately associate it with the biggest one out there. Making its identity so centered around guns has done nothing but cause a world of pain for the developers, because instead of being referred to as a cross between two distinct games set in distinct genres, almost everyone refers to Palworld as Pokemon with guns. That tagline, which has been created by consumers of the title, makes the game sound like a mod of an already existing title. The marketing strategy worked though, with the game selling at a record pace and breaking the record for the most concurrent players on Steam. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this game's success is owed pretty heavily to Pokemon, because once people figured out that this was really a combination of Legends Arceus and Rust, the immediate reaction was, oh hell yeah, I'm buying that. The fact that so many ROM hacks of classic Pokemon games exist out there solidifies my hypothesis that fans of the series are looking for different and more ways to play Pokemon now, and will gladly shell out cash for a game that's half the price of modern Pokemon releases, while also doing more than any of these games in terms of changing up the genre. And since the older games are also largely unavailable, the only way you'll be able to go back to any of these older titles like Platinum is buying them for $150 on Amazon through a reseller. Therefore, I completely understand why people flock to buy this game without giving it a second thought, including me. When I said that this game owed a lot of its success to Pokemon though, I didn't just mean in terms of equatable appearances. Within a couple days of the game's release, some Twitter users found and translated some old tweets from Takuro Mizobe dating back to December of 2021 and November of 2022. In the tweet from November, Takuro writes, "If you pass it through the filter of AI, the image is often not of a specific thing, so maybe the copyright issue will be resolved. I was surprised to see the world is actually moving in that direction. In about 30 years, the general public perception of copyright may have changed considerably." And then, in December of 2021, the AI has evolved so much that I can no longer tell which one is a Pokemon. Left is Pokemon-like monster generated by AI, and on the right are real Pokemon. I went ahead and vetted these tweets myself, and yes, that is the CEO of Pocket Pair, whose Twitter account has been active since 2010. When you're creating a game whose appearance has been heavily compared to Pokemon ever since it saw the light of day, it's probably not a good idea to say that it's easy to create fake Pokemon using an artificial image generator. Remember, the tagline of Pokemon with guns has no other title to compare it to. Everyone will be closely monitoring the game for the slightest similarity or evidence that supports those suspicions. This isn't the first time they've dabbled in AI-generated imagery either, as another one of Pocket Pair's games is called AI Imposter. It's a party game that is centered around picking out the fake AI image against other user-submitted art. Mizobe-san's bio on Twitter also proudly states that he is the founder of CoinCheck, a Bitcoin cryptocurrency exchange. In my experience, being a crypto enthusiast often goes hand in hand with wanting to take shortcuts, all in the name of praising the technology that it was built on. An article by Rolling Stone neatly compiled a small collection of tweets of the loudest skeptics of the Palworld designs, which includes this person whose tweet I forgot to take a screenshot of before it was taken down, probably due to harassment. Among those skeptics are a smattering of people with experience in 3D modeling, or at the very least people who know how to use 3D animation software well enough to rip character models from two distinct Among those skeptics are a smattering of people with some experience in 3D modeling, or at the very least people who know how to use 3D animation well enough to rip character models from two distinct games and compare them. And the outlook is, well, it's mixed. Hi, Sojourner Kai from the future here to interject on myself once again. And this time it's about my sources that I have on this. Now, this idiot forgot to take screenshots of all of these Twitter accounts and Twitter sources that were listed in the Rolling Stone article that I will be referencing for the next couple of minutes here. And what has happened is that they have either privated their accounts, deleted the tweets, and in the case of Palmer, whom I will be talking about later and referencing in another part of the video, has completely deleted their Twitter account. So I no longer have access to these tweets. The best that I can say is that you'll have to kind of take my word for it. I can recreate what I did here, but I unfortunately don't have the original sources, so I do apologize for not having that available. I do have the links because I saved the links, but I don't have the actual images, so I do apologize for that, and I won't interject again. This is the last interruption that will be in this video. Thanks for listening. Okay, enjoy the rest. Bye-bye. Here are some tweets by a concept artist named Gianluca Barbera, who specializes in creating his own fake Pokemon with a lovely art station attached to his account. The account BioFrog, whose account was created in January of this year, has been pretty exclusive in bringing these to light. And I hesitate to use this person as a source for this video though, as they openly state in the pin that their account was created not for the sake of clarifying plagiarism, but because they hate the glorification of animal abuse. Looking across their tweets, they have a decent number of these side-by-side examples, but the closer one looks, the more phony the comparisons appear. Twitter user TTV Palmer, a machine learning engineer by the name of Carrie Palmer, has a series of tweets where he went around debunking these arguments and offered more insight into the world of 3D modeling. And even Nintendo themselves have issued an official statement on the matter and would take action if any infringement appeared. This is the same company that will shut down re-uploads of its soundtracks when you can't find them anywhere else, and the company that will religiously hunt down ROM hosting websites because they'd rather you buy Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky for $230 on Amazon. If they have a legal case to take, they will take it. Now, I very much hate that I'm taking up this argument because it reminds me of a certain Aatrox player whose final defense was, well, the FBI couldn't find any proof, so it didn't happen. What I hate more though is when people make shit up on the internet and get outraged over it. Nobody vetted these sources, and we were all so convinced of the similarities that as soon as someone said that the wolf looks like a wolf in another video game, we all lost our fucking minds. I don't fully disagree with the public outrage, but please try to get better sources before you set fire to the building. From what I've learned, my hypothesis is that the truth is potentially a lot sadder than just an artificial image maker. Mizobe wrote a lengthy blog post titled "A Coincidental Story Called Palworld, where your fate will be decided in 3 days." The post contains a lot of information, being a comprehensive outline of the executive decisions that led to the creation of Palworld. And you'll have to forgive me on this one, as the blog post is written entirely in Japanese and I bulk translated segments through Google Translate. Some phrases or the exact wording may be off, but I feel pretty confident in saying that I at least get the general idea. The article is broken into 10 segments, with the latter 6 being titled Miracle Number Whatever, where Mizobe recounts several impossible circumstances that were crucial in the development of Palworld. Miracle Number 1 talks about a 20-year-old middle school dropout who spent his spare time publishing gun animations to Twitter. At the time, Mizobe was hard-pressed to find a person who could animate guns while also being fluent in Japanese, because it's not really a part of their culture, and came across this person's Twitter account by pure chance. Mizobe replied to one of this person's animations and asked him if he could purchase the animation and would like to continue the discussion in DMs. And I was able to find this person's Twitter, and he is still animating anime girls with firearms to this day. It's a consistent theme for him. The young man was living in Hokkaido, and Pocket Pair was based out of Tokyo. But as soon as he saw that the company was real and had intentions to pay him for his talents, he signed on to the project. This blog post even contains the lengthy DM discussions between this individual and Mizobe regarding his future employment. Mizobe also goes on to praise his character and seems truly grateful for this first miracle. Hi, if you notice any slight differences, that's because I'm recording this on a different day, but don't worry about it. Miracle number 2 is a weird one. In Palworld's first trailer, the creatures and characters were shown using a variety of Unity-based assets. Unity was the engine that they had used to create Craftopia and Overdungeon, and so the team was naturally going to continue using the engine that they were the most comfortable with. One day, Pocket Pair was contacted by a programmer named Matsutani Hiroto. He said that he was a freelance engineer with about 10 years of experience within the field, except there was one slight catch. Matsutani was only experienced with Unreal Engine and had basically none with Unity. Mizobe had the decision to either migrate the entire team over to Unreal Engine, which was only about 10 people at the time, or drop this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with an experienced programmer and continue plugging away at the game in its current unfinished state. And so the swap was made successfully, with Mizobe eventually rationalizing the decision away by saying that, oh, Unreal Engine is better for marketing games anyway. Miracle number 3, creating 100 monsters with no 3D motion experience at the company at the time. Alright, so this is the section where a lot of you might expect to see Mizobe talk about the concept art or, the way that things were created, because he might slip up and mention the use of AI, but there isn't any mention of that whatsoever. A consistent theme in the first few paragraphs is Mizobe bemoaning the fact that creating over 100 monsters for this game takes a lot of work, especially when they all have unique skeletons. He goes on to explain how long it would take him to rig one creature and then extrapolate that number across 100 other creatures, and it was eventually a feat that he felt just wasn't physically possible until he met with an Adachi-san. Adachi is a veteran motion designer that was hired on by Pocket Pair's Human Resources division, if they even have the space to designate that. Mizobe claims that this was the person who completed Palworld, and Adachi Ryohei is appropriately credited as the lead motion animator on the project. Miracle number 4, the budget for the game was nearly 1 billion yen, and I managed it poorly, which is a pretty defeatist title for a miracle if you ask me. Reading the section not so much reveals that Mizobe was off spending money on blackjack and hookers and being irresponsible with what the company had, but rather that he very quickly became daunted by the scale of the project that he promised. In a moment of candor, he said that the trailer was created first before development even began, to gauge general audience interest. And once the reception was positive across the board, that's when they started developing the game. He feared criticism, but quickly turned that fear around by noting how gamers will think anything is fine as long as it is interesting. I love this about gamers. Before we continue, let's examine and think about a couple of important points. The trailer for Palworld was released in June of 2021, and development for the trailer specifically was said to have started 3 months before that, setting their start of their adventure back in March of 2021. But they were also still using Unity at the time and had very few models to showcase. In fact, a lot of the stuff that they use, they admit to having been Unity-based assets. That means that in 2.5 years, they managed to port the entire game over to Unreal Engine 4, design over 100 monsters, and then get those monsters working as actual creatures in the game. In these 2.5 years, they also managed to burn through 1 billion with a B N, which equates to around 6.7 million US dollars today. A quick Google search states that one of my favorite games, Ori and the Blind Forest, cost Moon Studios about $6 million to make, so I guess the number kind of tracks. The source for That number about Ori and the Blind Forest is a little untrustworthy though, so I'm a bit apprehensive to use it as an actual point of data. Either way, to someone like myself, $6 million is a lot of money, and that's what's blowing me away here. The real reason for Mizobe's production cost was because he wasn't very keen on managing a budget. The Pocket Pair team was only, like I've said before, 10 people at the time, with most of them being focused entirely on Craftopia. When this project showed promise, Mizobe was forced to split the team and put 4 people on the early stages of development. He didn't want the game to be a massive title and initially only wanted to spend about a year working on it, but one thing led to another and it's led us to the game that we see today. 3 years and 30 more hires later, almost all of the billion N that they started with was spent just as the game was ready to release in early access. He considers this to be a miracle because in spite of his self-admitted poor budget management, they still managed to use up exactly what they needed. Remember, this blog post was written and published 3 days before Pocket Pair released Palworld to the general public. And I can't help but wonder what might have happened if the game didn't sell at the record pace that it did. This may be considered a miracle, but I could very easily see Pocket Pair pulling the plug on the game if it wasn't able to recoup its losses. Miracle number 5, a college graduate that had been rejected in the screening process became the most important person in the company. When Mizobe was hiring people for the Pocket Pair team, he came across an unnamed recent college graduate who specialized in 3D modeling and motion. But the CEO was apparently unimpressed with the candidate initially and overlooked her application. Or his application? It's hard to tell because Google Translate shows Mizobe referring to this individual as her, him, and it, so perhaps they're gender fluid? I don't really know. The predominant pronouns chosen by Google Translate or by Mizobe seems to be she and her, so that's what I'll refer to her as for the rest of this segment. The hiring half of this story boils down to how this person was rejected from over 100 companies that they applied to, with Pocket Pair being among them. I know there's someone out there whose brain short-circuited when I said among. You know who you are. Mizobe sent out the traditional, formal, business wordy letter of rejection that you would come to expect, saying that they went ahead with other applicants, and that message was sent in October of 2020. 4 months later, the student sent a message back that doesn't really translate well, but from what I can gather, it's supposed to say something to the effect of, "Thanks for being gracious with your rejection, here's my portfolio if you ever change your mind." Mizobe, shocked by the reply message so many months later, decided to talk to this person again about a potential job. He was delighted to find that she was extremely smart and proficient at 3D modeling and motion, which Pocket Pair was in dire need of at the time. Her reply message was also sent a month before the Palworld trailer production was set to start, so it's likely that she has been involved in Palworld since that process started. Now keep in mind that this unnamed college graduate was approached in 2020, before any news of Palworld had really come out. Even if she made up her portfolio in the 4 months between October and February, she wouldn't have approached Pocket Pair or any of these other companies empty-handed, because that's just not how artists operate. The reason why she was rejected is never clarified, and Mizobe muses that maybe it's because she's terrible at taking interviews. Point is, Mizobe recognized this person both in name and artistic appearance after the fact, and was impressed with her handiwork once he gave her a chance to show him what she could do. The added bonus is that this hire also has familiarity with the English language and internet meme culture, which Mizobe admits that he is sensitive to. You know that pink sex-crazed lizard that we've put at number 69 in the PAL deck? That was probably done off of this person's advice, given what we can read here. But there are 3 points of concern here that raise little alarm bells in my head, even if they aren't confirmed. Number 1, this person was rejected from over 100 companies as a 3D artist and motion designer. Maybe that was down to her being terrible at taking interviews, but 100 companies is a lot to get rejected from purely based on that kind of reasoning. Number 2, she is stated to be an insanely fast worker and could have corrections based on feedback out in a matter of minutes. This is where Mizobe's penchant for artificial technology potentially shows its bias here, because if the design wasn't fully up to his standards, he could have adjusted the prompt to make the PAL look more in line with what he wanted. Number 3, she is a recent college graduate that works leaps and bounds faster than anyone Mizobe has ever seen. I know some people who work incredibly fast, and so these are unconfirmed alarm bells. So all I can really say about this one, based on this account of her working capabilities, is that that's pretty weird. The final miracle in Palworld is that Palworld is an extremely interesting game. Mizobe starts his last section off by talking about how the unique combination of graphics, gameplay, and scalability make Palworld unique. He briefly criticized companies that play it safe by riding on the coattails of major IPs, and even admits that the only company that can semi-afford to take major multi-billion-yen risks is Nintendo. I especially love this quote here where he outright says, "Due to these circumstances, large titles are able to produce games that are not challenging and passively entertaining. This is most large-scale development." I love independent developers because they can take shots like this and not give a damn. The rest of the article continues to break down the target audience of the game and what he considers Palworld to be similar to. Most notably, instead of comparing it to Pokemon, which he's not dumb enough to do, he instead says that Ark Survival Evolved is the only survival crafting game that lets you tame monsters for your base, and is shocked that no one else has tried to reinvent that idea. In the annotation at the bottom, he says that fans of Minecraft and Valheim will enjoy this title. And he even mentions that the notably cartoonish creatures against a realistic background is an intentional choice, even if it does kind of look like an Unreal Engine tech demo. The thing is, having played this game for a good number of hours myself, I'm inclined to agree with Mizobe-san. The game is fun in the way that it combines a handful of familiar elements into a complete package that hasn't been done before. It's only when the capturing of PAL starts that I'm reminded of Pokemon. Otherwise, these games are very systematically distinct. Now that I've laid out what I believe to be both sides of the argument of Palworld's plagiarism versus its credibility, I'd like to bring up a couple more closing points and present to you my final theory. My game theory, perhaps. No, it's too soon. Andy Robinson of Video Games Chronicle wrote a report on the 22nd of January regarding the accusations of plagiarism suffered by Pocket Pair and their dev team. Robinson cleverly points out that Mizobe neither confirms nor denies the similarities to Pokemon. He instead redirects the conversation towards how he is responsible for the game's production and would like for people to stop slandering the artists and sending them death threats. Yes, it is the year of our Lord 2024 and we are still sending death threats online over shitty video games. Robinson's article claims that VGC has spoken with senior game designers that are experienced in the field regarding this topic. The comments corroborate the negative point of view that the designs were plagiarized, with one even stating that they would testify in court if there was ever a legitimate case. These sources are never given a name, so we have no frame of reference as to whom is talking, and for this I have 8 words for you. It's very easy to make shit up online. Now listen as I get progressively heated, and then abruptly cut my sentence into my next. Hi, I'm Sojourner Kai. I'm a professional voice actor that has been working in the field for the last 15 years. What projects have I worked on? You'll just have to take my word for it, bud. From the similarities that a lot of the pals possess to Pokemon, it's easier to believe that Pocket Pair committed acts of plagiarism than if Andy Robinson created some fake industry professionals, given how specific their examples are. It's just funny to me that in this moment where I'm trying to vet my sources, my best threads are an ex-Blizzard employee, a concept art student, 2 unnamed senior game developers, and a very biased source in Takuro Mizobe himself. Additionally, Video Games Chronicle cites Biofrog, the same Twitter account that is incredibly biased against Pocket Pair, as a credible source in their article, which turned me off from believing the latter have to be true. And the only other person that is named in this article is a lawyer, Richard Hoeg, who heads his own business firm in Southeast Michigan, and his statement is a general summary of what might or might not constitute plagiarism.
Oh, I'm losing my mind.
Okay. In order to make a final conclusion, we need to examine everything we've learned and everything we know. Mizobe Takuro is the CEO of Pocket Pair, an independent game company that developed Craftopia in 2017, which eventually became abandonware. In 2022, while Palworld was supposed to be nearing completion according to Mizobe's original goals, he shared a variety of tweets that were in amazement at the potency of artificially generated content. Most infamously, one of these tweets showed a side-by-side comparison of AI-generated Pokemon-like creatures versus real ones. Now, Mizobe never claims that he was the one that initiated the prompt, but we can more safely assume this because of his other AI-sympathetic tweets. He is also the same person that created his own cryptocurrency exchange for Bitcoin, an endeavor which is frequently headed by scam artists. I gotta say, this track record is not good. As someone who sees themselves as a journalist and a voice actor in the future, I have zero tolerance for AI in any capacity. For that reason, I do not trust Mizobe-san to hand me a game with 100+ unique designs that look suspiciously similar to Pokemon while also claiming that they are original designs. And this is where my buyer's regret comes in, because while the game is undeniably fun to play, I feel that my hastiness in purchasing it could have inadvertently supported the very software that looks to replace me and my future career. Considering there are multiple concept artists credited though, and considering the tweets from Carrie Palmer, the machine learning engineer from earlier, it's unlikely that the designs are artificial intelligence. Mizobe may be sympathetic towards AI, but that would also mean that every other person employed at Pocket Pair was complicit in letting him use AI to dictate the game's art direction. I don't see any reason why so many concept artists would be credited and presumably paid for their jobs if Mizobe could hypothetically operate on the full confidence that he could use AI to replace them from the start. The animator who specialized in weapons animations has a whole Twitter portfolio. The new college graduate genius character was applying to dozens of jobs, presumably with a portfolio as early as mid-2020. Adachi Ryohei and Matsutani Hiroto are veterans of the industry that surely would have looked for employment elsewhere if they felt that their talents were being mocked. You might also think that Mizobe could have silently fired dissenters from the company, but Japanese labor laws state that you can't really lay folks off unless the company is veritably facing bankruptcy, for example. So that article that you all shared about Iwata Satoru cutting his salary for Nintendo after the Wii U failed wasn't because he was a nice guy. It's because it's illegal to fire your workforce in Japan. But in 2014, around the same time of the Wii U's failure, Nintendo of Europe faced some 300 layoffs because the same labor laws don't apply there. The two people on the other side of the argument that have a point in all of this are Eric Covington, that ex-Blizzard employee game designer, and Gianluca Barbera, the concept art student. Covington, while the first tweet in his thread references that one other account, goes on to mention that it's not a good idea for developer teams to cut corners as it puts everything around you at risk. Barbera's tweets are a lot simpler, pointing out how specific models in Palworld have similarities to Pokemon counterparts that we can also observably see. And since some shapes do look nearly identical to some found in Pokemon, that leads me to my depressing conclusion that I promised earlier. This isn't the work of AI. This is the work of at least one person openly tracing several elements and pinning them together. Due to how quickly this game was developed, with a team that wasn't fully formed from the start, that required them to also swap engines at an earlier point, with the lofty goals of creating 100 creatures that had to be drawn up, modeled, and coded, the reason why a lot of pals remind you of Pokemon is because some of their iconic shapes and components were traced and reused. The pointedly similar elements are too precise to be generated by AI unless you are actively stretching to make the connection. Therefore, the problem isn't a generative computer creating similar components, but more likely a case of tracing. I'm going to make an educated guess. In fact, a lot of this has been educated guesswork, but Please keep in mind that my guess is inconclusive and should never result in harassment from anyone. Based on what I know, thanks to the extensive blog post by Mizobe, it's possible that the college graduate was the one who implemented tracing into several of their art designs. The aforementioned fast turnaround times on designs and corrections makes me think that if they were truly creating over 100 unique monsters, then they would have cut corners and sped up the process by retracing several component pieces. This is further corroborated by the fact that many people have pointed out how some of the pieces of the PAL designs appear to be lifted from Pokemon, but slight differences in the topography make those parts distinct from a direct model rip. In other words, these pieces were still created by somebody, but their comparisons are pretty clear. Then there's the part where Mizobe admires the college grad's knowledge of the English language and overall internet culture, and I'd assume that extends to gaming culture. The PALs that most closely resemble a Pokemon counterpart, like Delphox with a hat or Cobalion's stunt double, are from Generation 5 and onwards. There are over 1,000 Pokemon in the game now, so my mental gymnastics leads me to believe that the art student figured out what components they could get away with copying without Mizobe noticing. But in some other instances, the PALs are nothing more than regular animals. Mozzarina is a cow without a nose, Dire Howl is a wolf, Chickapee is a chicken, and Lamball is a sheep. I know Lamball might remind you of Wooloo, a Generation 8 Pokemon, but to be frank, you can't draw a sheep in this style without making it into a ball of fluff. The final act of my guessing game comes down to how the college graduate was hired. She had applied to over 100 jobs and been rejected from every single one of them. Maybe not because of bad interviews, but possibly over clear tracing in her portfolio. Mizobe, being sensitive to internet culture and looking just about anywhere for someone to hire, might have overlooked that possibility and hired her anyway. This entire argument hinges on nobody else at Pocket Pair recognizing at least some similarities to Pokemon, the most successful franchise in the world, created in Pocket Pair's home country. And I've intentionally used inconclusive language in all of my guesswork, because that's all it really is. Guesswork. Phrases like feels and I think, and according to these people on Twitter, are points of inconclusive evidence. Please reach your own conclusions and don't jump to them. And if any of this is even remotely true, I really hope that the art student doesn't get publicly shamed in the, "Oh, we had an inexperienced person at the company, we had no idea they were doing this" kind of way. And even if Palworld's art assets are the result of tracing at the end of the day, I'm still glad that I was able to play something fresh and engaging in the creature collector and survival crafting genres. Until we hear news from the professional legal team at Nintendo, though, I will be very wary of Pocket Pair going forward. And that's all I really have to say for this video. Thanks for listening to me ramble for all this time. Safe travels. Goodbye. I thought plagiarism in the first, like H-Bomber guy's now the plagiarism dude. That's all right. That was cringe. Why would I do that to myself?